Thien Huong, the youngest daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Phat Dat, owners of an import-export company with 18 major industries in Saigon in the 1950s. Born and raised in a wealthy family, Thien Huong, their darling daughter, was naturally pampered and enjoyed more privileges than many of her peers. Right after transitioning from primary school to junior high, instead of attending a prestigious high school in Saigon like Ao Tim or Chaser Club Lot, Thien Huong was sent by her parents to a convent boarding school in Da Lat. Consequently, she could only visit home during summer breaks or holidays. Initially, Thien Huong vehemently protested by going on a hunger strike for several days at the boarding house. How could a blossoming teenage girl, eager for fun and friends, be confined within the four walls of a convent boarding school, surrounded only by other girls? The nuns at the convent, right in the first week, intended to send the stubborn girl back to her family, if it weren't for the appearance of an 18-year-old young man. It sounds a bit strange, but it was true and a turning point in Thien Huong's life. That young man was Tai, a junior high student preparing for his Part II baccalaureate exam at the end of the year in Saigon. He was the only son of a middle-class intellectual family in Da Lat, so he occasionally visited his home there. That year, on a weekend, Tai happened to be by the high wall of the convent. It was just then that young Thien Huong, unable to bear the confinement of the boarding school, decided to follow her friend's example and try to climb over the wall to get out. Most of the students who climbed the wall were experienced, so their escapes and returns were always smooth and successful. Only Thien Huong, a true novice escaping for the first time, instead of tying two bedsheets together and securing one end to a tree branch inside, letting the other end hang outside and swinging down, Thien Huong had barely descended less than a meter from the top of the wall when the fabric rope came undone, and she fell freely to the ground, nearly 2 meters below. Thinking she was going to die, Thien Huong closed her eyes after letting out a scream. But strangely, she felt a soft landing, as if someone had caught her from below. Opening her eyes, Huong almost screamed again, for she was being held in the arms of a young man with a youthful face but a very mature smile. Tai, the destined young man who caught the wall-escaping girl, was very gallant. If this delicate body were to hit the ground, what would be left of its graceful figure? Young Thien Huong, though scared out of her wits, managed to stand up and stammer, "How dare you hug someone without any shame?" Tai politely introduced himself. "I'm Tai, I live nearby." "And you, it looks like this is your first time escaping school, isn't it?" As if clutching a lifeline, Thien Huong forgot all shyness. "You live nearby, huh? So every weekend, come out here and catch this tiny body for me, okay? And also be my guide, right?" Thien Huong shrugged gracefully. "That depends." They were close in age, so they quickly became familiar, especially when Huong learned that Tai was also from Saigon. She asked directly, "Can I come to your house to play?" Tai made a sweeping gesture. "Oh, absolutely, young lady." Thien Huong, like a bird released from its cage, ran joyfully forward, making Tai call her back. "It's this way." They walked side by side like old friends, and it wasn't until they were almost at Tai's house that he asked, "What's your name? You haven't said yet." "Thien Huong," Tai blurted out, praising, "the divine scent of heaven." Thien Huong corrected him, "I prefer to be called the divine beauty of heaven." "Oh, either way, it's absolutely gorgeous." They became close from that day on. Thanks to this, Thien Huong stopped her hunger strike and no longer cried herself to sleep every night. On the contrary, she eagerly awaited Saturday afternoon so she could climb the wall and be met by the handsome young man, who would take her all over Da Lat. And afterwards, she would even go to his house for joyful family meals. Tai stayed home to study for a month and then had to return to Saigon for the full baccalaureate exam that year. He passed and got to spend 3 months of summer break in Da Lat before starting university. As for Thien Huong, instead of returning to her parents' home as she initially wished, she flat out refused when her parents came to pick her up. "I don't want to go home anymore. If I go back, I'll have to leave again, and I can't bear saying goodbye." That was just a way of saying it. In reality, she only wanted to stay in Da Lat with her first love. Throughout that 3-month summer, the young man just turned 18, and the 16-year-old girl began the most beautiful days of their love. From Thai Ta, Xuan Huang Lake, to the Valley of Love, Lake Then Tho, and Cam Lai Waterfall, their footprints were everywhere. It was the beginning of a romance, but also the beginning of a tragedy. 6 months later, after Tai had started his first year of university, Thien Huong's parents in De Lat personally went to the school and officially asked the nuns to let their daughter withdraw. They didn't explain the real reason for Thien Huong's withdrawal, so when Huong first heard, she protested loudly. But upon reflection, she was suddenly happy, realizing that moving back to Saigon meant seeing her beloved every day. However, Thien Huong's joy was quickly extinguished. On her very first day back home, Thien Huong faced a tragedy. Huong's parents invited a business associate to dinner at their house. During the meal, Huong was introduced with words that hit her like a thunderclap. Huong's mother told their guest, "Our niece still has 2 years until she finishes her baccalaureate part 2, but right now, we can make a promise to each other regarding their engagement." Mr. Fat Dat elaborated, "This very week you two can proceed with the engagement ceremony, and they will marry in 2 years." Thien Huong, who had been listening, felt as if she had fallen from the sky, thinking her mother was talking about someone else, until her mother pulled her hand and pointed towards the two guests. "These are Mr. and Mrs. Phuc Loy, Thien Phuc's parents. He will be your husband in the future. Go ahead and greet them." Thien Huong lost all self-control. She bit her lips tightly, as if to draw blood, then bolted out of the room as if pursued by a ghost. Van Han, 18 years old, was the daughter of a capitalist, owner of a renowned plantation in the red soil region, famous not only for its business prosperity, but also for being one of the owner couple's 2 daughters. Among them, Van Han was considered a beauty queen. Though only 18, she had captivated dozens of contemporary princes and wealthy young men. Most of her suitors were influential figures in Saigon. But contrary to popular belief, and against her parents' wishes, the one who caught Van Han's eye was a poor baccalaureate graduate. A man down on his luck who had to leave Saigon and go all the way to the red soil region to work as a lowly clerk at the Nguyen Din rubber plantation. The love story of this cross-class couple began with a cup of rubber latex. That day, Van Han and Nhu Lan, the owner's 2 daughters, accompanied their father to the plantation to attend a ball hosted by the owner himself, the girl's father, to entertain high-ranking French officials. The guests included over 100 influential figures of that era. They came partly out of respect for the host's wealth, but more so for the allure of Nguyen Din's 2 beautiful daughters. Every guest family brought their esteemed sons with a single hope: that their children would catch the eye of the 2 young Nguyen ladies, especially Van Han. The afternoon before the ball, the car took the entire Nguyen Din family to the plantation. Seeing that it was still early, Van Han insisted on going to play in the rubber garden. Unlike her sister, Nhu Lan, the elder sister, appeared haughty and dismissed her sister's idea. "What's there to play with besides a few rubber trees? I'm dead tired. I just want to take a nap before the party starts." Seeing that her sister didn't want to go, Van Han invited her maid to come along, also instructing, "Don't tell my father I took you into the forest, okay?" Like a bird released from its cage, Van Han ran and skipped happily amidst the thick carpet of fallen rubber leaves. The endless rows of straight trees delighted her immensely. She ran, hugging tree after tree, playing hide-and-seek with her maid. After only a short while of frolicking, they had gone quite far. The maid had to remind her, "Miss Ba, don't go too far or it will get dark." Once Van Han was having fun, there was no stopping her. She ran straight ahead, calling back, "If you're not coming, then go back. I'll come back whenever my legs get tired." She ran until she felt exhausted, then stopped by a rubber tree to rest. Suddenly, she noticed a cup collecting latex, with white drops of sap beginning to flow down. It was a truly impressive sight that, despite having visited with her father several times before, Han had never witnessed firsthand. Staring wide-eyed, she couldn't suppress her curiosity. Van Han dipped a few fingers into that special cup of latex. The initial sensation was cool, but then, as she withdrew her fingers, she panicked. The rubber latex clung tightly to her fingers, and the more she wiggled them, the more they stuck together. In a flurry, Van Han used her other hand to grab the fingers stuck with latex, making it even worse. Within seconds, both her hands were almost completely stuck together. The stubborn girl was about to burst into tears, not knowing what to do, when suddenly someone grabbed her hand with a pristine white handkerchief, saying, "You'll need this to get rid of it, young lady." Looking up, she saw a strange young man holding her hand. Han almost shrieked, but as if anticipating her reaction, the young man politely offered a gentle smile. "I'm a clerk on this plantation. Don't be afraid, just stand still, and I'll help you." With practiced hands in just a moment, both of Van Han's hands were clean. However, seeing that there was still some stickiness between her fingers, the young man surprisingly pulled up the hem of his shirt and wiped them again. Han wanted to stop him, but it was too late. It wasn't until she could move freely without any stickiness that she spoke up. "Thank you, your shirt." The young man smiled warmly. "It's nothing. Anyone who works with rubber gets sap on them. Sap means money." Only now did Han suddenly feel worried. It was getting dark. She turned to leave but then remembered and asked, "What's your name?" "Fu. And I am Van Han." The young man, Fu, quickly said, "You're the owner's daughter." Van Han was hurrying back, so she didn't have time to say anything more. It wasn't until she had walked several tens of steps that she turned back and saw him standing silently, watching her go. That evening, at the ball, Han suddenly complained of a stomachache and excused herself from attending. When her parents came to her, Han pretended to be in severe pain, which truly worried her mother. "Perhaps the child isn't used to the poisonous winds of this region. I told you, if you're going to celebrate, do it in Saigon. Why come to this land full of deadly vapors, I don't know." Seeing his wife grumble and knowing how stubborn his youngest daughter was, Mr. Nguyen Din, despite all the guests outside wishing for Van Han's presence, had no choice but to go out and offer his apologies. Her elder sister, Nhu Lan, was thrilled because without her sister, who was like a magnet, she would become the magnet attracting all the young men that night. And instead of having to return to Saigon the very next morning, Van Han pleaded to stay another day, citing extreme tiredness and inability to travel. Indulging their daughter, Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen Din left the old nanny to care for Van Han, while they and Nhu Lan returned home earlier. As soon as her parents left the plantation, Van Han threw off her blanket and sat up, immediately calling her maid to ask, "Is there a clerk named Fu here?" The maid, who had served for many years, was quite quick-witted. "Yes, Sir Fu works in the office over there, and he lives in a small house behind it, a few hundred meters away." "Does he live alone?" The maid nodded. "Just him. They say he has no wife or children, and no relatives have visited him in the 3 or 4 years since he came here." Han dismissed the maid, and immediately afterwards, she, playing the role of the young mistress, made a sudden visit to the plantation office. She entered the office where nearly a dozen employees were working, scanning the room without asking anyone. A few employees recognized the young mistress and respectfully stood up to greet her, as did the rest. Someone asked, "Miss, do you need anything?" Without answering, she asked instead, "Are these all the employees here?" An elderly man quickly stood up and replied, "Sir Fu, the clerk, is out in the forest on assignment." Han politely greeted everyone and then walked away quickly. No one understood the purpose of the young mistress's sudden visit, so they felt uneasy. Only Van Han felt a little pleased that she hadn't encountered Clerk Fu in the crowded office. She went straight to the forest, and that's when she felt lost. The rubber plantation spanned hundreds of acres, and all the paths looked alike. She didn't know which way to go without getting lost. Fortunately, right before Han's eyes was a small stilt house, and suddenly recalling what the maid had said, she thought it might be Fu's house. Without a moment's hesitation, Han walked straight towards it. The house was closed, both windows and the main door. Although there was no external lock, Han guessed no one was inside. Checking her wristwatch, she saw it was just past 10 a.m. Han pursed her lips. He won't be back until noon. She hesitated for a moment, then finally fumbled in her jacket pocket for a white, perfumed handkerchief, intending to place it in the window crack. But she put it in, then took it out again, feeling it wasn't right. There was no way to place the handkerchief so that the owner, upon returning and opening the door, would immediately see it and understand that someone had left the handkerchief that the clerk had used to wipe rubber latex for a stranger. She hesitated for a while longer. Suddenly, Han noticed the main door was only ajar. She boldly pushed it open. The door opened easily. Inside, the house was quite simple, just a single bed with a pillow, a neatly folded blanket, a small wardrobe, a writing desk, and several paintings hanging on the wall. They were probably painted by the owner of the house. She knew it was a bit audacious to trespass into someone else's house, but at that moment, Van Han, for some unknown reason, daringly tiptoed in. The atmosphere inside was quite cozy and pleasant. She only intended to step in, find a place for the handkerchief, and leave immediately, but the warmth of the room made Han linger. She walked to the writing desk, looked at the neatly stacked books. On the desk was a pristine stack of white paper. Perhaps the owner was about to write something. Suddenly, she saw a few lines of text at the top of the page. The handwriting was quite beautiful, very eye-catching, and most notably in its content. She is like a strange flower fallen from the sky, brightening an entire corner of the often dreary, gray rubber forest. I boldly took her hands, like red flower buds, even if it was just to help her wipe away rubber latex, but looking back, I feel like I deserved a slap for my recklessness. But precisely because of that, even now, I'm still flustered. I'll surely lose sleep tonight, and for many nights to come. The passage was short, but Van Han read it again after finishing and wished it were longer. She smiled to herself, realizing the young man was writing about her. Suddenly, a creak at the door interrupted Han's thoughts. Fu walked in abruptly, and both were startled, staring at each other. She could only manage half a word before they awkwardly looked away. After several tens of seconds, Han stammered, "I just..." She held out the handkerchief without saying anything more. As for Fu, after the initial shock, he regained his composure. "I rarely lock the door when I go out because there's nothing valuable inside." Van Han also became calmer. She pointed to the written paper and jokingly asked, "If this were lost, would you regret it?" At this, Fu suddenly flinched. He knew she had read it. It's a sin to write about someone without their permission right away. She put the handkerchief back into her pocket, intending to return it to him, but since he had written that, she decided against it. She walked towards the door. Fu suddenly pulled a handkerchief covered in rubber latex from his own pocket and smiled. "It can still be used." Han stopped. For some reason, she took her own handkerchief out and placed it in Fu's hand. She then quickly snatched Fu's latex-stained handkerchief and put it in her pocket. Then she quickly walked out, saying, "So, we're even, clerk." That's how their love began, and it clung to them, sticking tighter than rubber latex. From then on, every Saturday afternoon, Van Han insisted on going to the plantation instead of going to Vung Tau or Long Hai to play with her family. At first, Han's parents were only surprised at how quickly their beloved daughter had changed her lifestyle, but gradually, they discovered something earth-shattering. For them, it was utterly unacceptable for the daughter of a plantation owner to fall in love with a mere worker. As a result, Clerk Fu was fired, given a sum of money, and forced to settle in a remote highland region. Van Han was devastated and heartbroken, attempting suicide several times. Thu Ha was born into a poor family, growing up in the deprivation of her parents and 6 siblings. It was thought that Ha would not receive a complete education due to their difficult circumstances. However, with diligence and hard work, Ha excelled through primary and secondary school. In her 4th year, Ha passed the junior high entrance exam and then studied for the baccalaureate. While in her 3rd year, Ha's life took a turn when she started tutoring at the home of a wealthy plantation magnate, Mr. Nguyen Din. It was here that fate brought Thu Ha to Tuan, the eldest brother of Van Han and Nhu Lan. As the eldest son of the magnate, inheriting his father's business was a given for Tuan, but his temperament was entirely opposite to his father's, who only knew business and money. Thus, whenever his father mentioned succession, Tuan remained indifferent. Tuan's only passion was traveling around to help the poor and orphans. Therefore, when he met Thu Ha, the poor student who came to tutor, Tuan's benevolent heart was stirred. They fell in love as naturally as any other young couple, but they forgot that the biggest obstacle they had to overcome was family, specifically the billionaire plantation owner Nguyen Din. After the incident where their youngest daughter, Van Han, fell in love with the plantation clerk, Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen Din had been racking their brains to cope and prevent it, and had just felt relieved after successfully getting rid of Clerk Fu. Upon returning home, they were utterly astonished to discover another ticking time bomb in their house. That day, just after returning from the hospital following Van Han's suicide attempt with sleeping pills, Tuan, their eldest son, walked into the living room, hand in hand with Thu Ha, while his parents were resting. Before his parents' astonished gaze, Tuan calmly revealed everything. "Mother and father, Thu Ha and I are in love. We wish to marry after Ha completes her full baccalaureate." Before their son could finish his sentence, Mrs. Nguyen Din shrieked, "What did you just say?" Mr. Nguyen Din, who had long been displeased with his eldest son's indifference to the family business, now felt as if oil had been poured on fire. He grabbed the ashtray from the table and hurled it directly at Tuan, yelling, "You unfilial son, get out of my sight." Whether by accident or design, the ashtray flew directly into Thu Ha's face. The poor girl, cowering beside her beloved, immediately collapsed, blood profusely covering her beautiful face. While Thien frantically embraced Thu Ha's body, Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen Din calmly walked back to their private room. The injury was quite severe, but fortunately not life-threatening. Thu Ha had to stay in the hospital for a week. Thien remained by his beloved's side throughout those days, and from then on, Thien vowed never to return to a home where his parents only cared about money, forgetting everything else in the world. And although they were in the same hospital as Van Han, only a few rooms apart, whenever Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen Din visited their daughter, they would pass by and see Thu Ha, but never once did they stop to ask about her. It was natural for her to feel sad and wronged, and Thien was also filled with sadness and resentment. Whenever Van Han was alone, Thien would come to confide in and comfort his sister. Upon hearing about Thu Ha's accident, Van Han cried a lot and once exclaimed, "If I can't die, then if I live, I'll live with the one I love. Do you dare to do the same, big brother?" Thien squeezed her hand. "I support you, and in return you'll stand by me and Thu Ha, won't you?" Van Han's eyes lit up with joy. "Absolutely. Tonight, if I feel better, I'll go visit her." Suddenly, Han asked, "Big brother, do you know where mother and father sent Phu?" Thien nodded. "Not for sure, but I think somewhere in De Lat. De Lat isn't far." Thien implied it wasn't too far, but the tea plantation was quite challenging to get to from De Lat. "Do you remember mother and father's tea plantation?" Van Han nodded. "I've heard of it, but I've never been there. Phu was sent there under strict conditions, making it hard for him to return." Han secretly rejoiced. She vowed to herself that she would see Phu again no matter the cost. Since returning from the hospital, Van Han had almost lived in isolation in her private room. She didn't appear at family meals and didn't go out when her parents were home. The person who used to go out or chat and play with her was Nhu Lan. But since the incident, Van Han seemed to want nothing to do with her. The two sisters used to share a room, but since returning home, Han herself had moved her personal belongings to the empty room next door to live there permanently. Thien also left home. Among the siblings, only Van Han sympathized with her brother. Yet, Thien hadn't contacted anyone since he left. From that moment, Han and Thu Ha became closer and more affectionate. Perhaps this mutual understanding stemmed from their shared, tragic circumstances. As for Mr. Nguyen Din, perhaps fearing that further strictness would lead his daughter to attempt suicide again, they no longer controlled her as tightly as before. They allowed Han to live freely as she pleased and even allocated a newly bought car for Han to drive wherever she wished. Part of this might also be because the parents were overly confident, believing they had severed all contact between Han and Clerk Phu. Furthermore, they also wanted Van Han to have the opportunity to socialize with other friends, especially within the upper class, so she might encounter someone new and completely forget that ill-fated love. Van Han hardly ever came home before 7 p.m. One day, Nhu Lan, wanting to reconcile with her sister, suggested they share a car to the market to buy groceries, but Han flatly refused. "When you find Phu and bring him back here, then we can be sisters again. Otherwise," Nhu Lan knew her fault. It was because she had reported everything about Van Han and Phu's relationship, even exaggerating the details, prompting her parents to decisively break up their love. Van Han drove alone from place to place, socializing with all kinds of friends. However, contrary to Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen Din's expectations, almost none of Van Han's acquaintances were from the wealthy class. Among her old and new school friends, Han only chose to associate with those from the working class. And that Saturday afternoon, Van Han's outing wasn't with a boyfriend, but with two girls. One who went to the same school as Han, a year below her since primary school, and the other was Thu Ha. After 3 days in the hospital, Thu Ha reappeared and completely stopped tutoring at Han's house, but their bond became even stronger. Therefore, when Han invited her to meet at a suburban cafe, Thu Ha immediately accepted. Thien knew about it and wanted to go along, but Ha firmly refused. "This is a girls' gathering, what would a man do there?" Van Han and Thu Ha arrived first, wondering about the third guest. Thu Ha kept asking, "Who is it, Han?" Van Han, feigning mystery, replied, "It's not strange, but you'll know when you meet her." When the person arrived, Thu Ha was utterly surprised and exclaimed, "Thien Huong?" Thien Huong was a year younger than them, having been one class below in primary school until Huong moved to De Lat to attend convent school. Although they hadn't been close recently, having been friends since childhood, They were happier to see each other than if they were biological sisters. The reunion was so unexpected that Thien Huong herself had to speak up. I thought Van Han invited me to meet someone else. I can't believe it's you, sister. Sister Ha, have you graduated yet? Squeezing her young friend's hand, Ha lovingly scolded. Out of sight, out of mind, so you forgot everything. I'm a class ahead of you and you're in 3rd year this year, right? Van Han interjected. Only 4th grade. If she dropped out at the beginning of the year, how could she be in 3rd year? Thur Ha was surprised. Huh, why did you drop out? I heard you were studying in De Lat. Accidentally touching a raw nerve, Thien Huong seemed displeased, but Van Han still briefly recounted the story of how Huong and Tai were separated by their families. And finally, she uttered a sentence that made all three look at each other. 3 daughters whose love was stolen by their own parents. In deep sympathy, they clasped hands tightly, and tears flowed freely. After a long while, Han finally spoke. How have you been living all this time, Huong? With a withered smile, Huong replied wearily, all I know is that I'm still searching for Tai in vain. Han gently shook her head. I'm no better off than you, my parents are even crueler. They used money and even schemes to make food disappear without a trace. Thien Huong's voice became even sadder. Tai was humiliated by my parents, so he dropped out of school and returned to De Lat. I went there to look for him, but no one knows where Tai went, and he hasn't contacted anyone for a whole year. When asked about Thur Ha's situation, Van Han explained in more detail. My brother left home over a month ago, and even Ha hasn't heard from him. Yesterday, I heard at home that my parents have finalized the procedures for him to study abroad in France. It's a way to sever the relationship between Tuan and Ha, which I oppose, but what meaning do I still have with my family now? The reunion party among the 3 girlfriends turned into a tearful gathering. Each recounted her story with deep weariness and sorrow, ultimately ending in tears. Thien Huong seemed more tragic. She expressed regret. I was the one who harmed Tai. His family was poor, but he was eager to learn and a good student. If he hadn't loved me, he would have graduated in just a few more years with a bright future ahead of him. Han was no better off. Fu was doing fine with his modest salary, but that was enough for him to continue his studies in the next few years. His family in a distant province relied solely on him. Thur Ha had only listened silently and sighed from the beginning. Han had to nudge her. Ha, do you have any ideas? Thur Ha cried to her. The recent shock was too heavy. Not only did I lose my beloved, but Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen Din came to my house to insult and humiliate me, to the point where now, whenever I leave the house, I don't dare to look at anyone. How about this? Van Han suggested. Let's go to De Lat. Thien Huong was surprised. What would we do there? Thur Ha also said. I'm tired of everything now, I don't feel like going anywhere. Han's voice became serious. Do you remember those small, secluded pagodas on the way to De Lat past Bao Loc Pass? As if understanding Han's intention, Thien Huong exclaimed, Become nuns? Han squeezed her friend's hand. Do you dare? Why wouldn't I dare? Becoming a nun means leaving behind the worries and desires of the mortal world. I've thought about it too. Van Han spoke as if preaching a sermon. Only in such a place can I find peace, and I'll forget everything while reciting scriptures. I will? Thur Ha suddenly asked. But who would let us become nuns there? I remember that place only has a few tiny hermitages, not a pagoda. Thien Huong, appearing knowledgeable, said, It's true there are no large pagodas. But who cares as long as there's a place for us to be together? We just need to be together, we don't even need to become nuns. Van Han thought more practically. 3 girls in such a secluded place won't be safe unless we're in monk's robes. I think an abandoned hermitage or small hut would be even better. The important thing is, do you guys dare? In a moment of impulsiveness, all 3 hugged each other tightly, their voices resolute. No regrets at all. Van Han outlined the plan. I have a car. I'll drive, and we'll all go first thing tomorrow morning. Once we get there, I'll drive the car down the ravine and we'll climb up to the old hermitage on the mountain. Agreed? All 3 said in unison. Yes. Right on time, at 7:00 a.m., all 3 met at a street corner. Each carried only a single bag of clothes, like a short trip. Van Han was more thoughtful. She insisted they buy rice, salt, soy sauce, and plenty of dried provisions. We'll be on our own for quite some time. No one will help us. They departed at 8:00 a.m. Han was an excellent driver, familiar with her family car, so over 5 hours later, they reached the foot of Bao Loc Pass. The road was deserted, but climbing the slope was quite dangerous, so Han drove very carefully, partly keeping an eye out for the old hermitage on the mountainside. As soon as she spotted it, Thien Huong exclaimed, It's up there. All three got out of the car and walked side by side, climbing the slope towards the hermitage like pilgrims seeking sacred ground. It took them over 10 minutes to reach their destination. It was an old hermitage built of bricks, but it seemed to have been deserted for a very long time, with spiderwebs and dust everywhere. Thien Huong looked pensive, thinking about the days she would have to live in such a place. Van Han, however, was satisfied. She squeezed her two friends' hands tightly as if to encourage them. This place is good. It's close to the main road but avoids the curiosity of others. I'll stay here. Even if one of you gives up halfway later on, I'm determined to stay alone. Both Huong and Thu Ha declared their resolve. We'll follow Han to the end. We have nothing left to long for in this world. Han urged. Then let's quickly get our belongings from the car and bring them up here. Then I still need to figure out how to push the car down the ravine. All three followed each other back down. Thien Huong suggested that Thu Ha bring the luggage up with her so Han could deal with the car. The two struggled to carry 3 suitcases along with items like rice, salt, dried provisions, and pots and pans up to the hermitage. Then Huong told Ha to stay up there and do some basic cleaning to make space for their things, while she went back down to help Han. Meanwhile, Han had started the car and driven it to the very edge of the ravine. Although she wasn't familiar with this task, she thought she just needed to put it in neutral, open the door, step out, and then push the car forward a little, and it would plunge into the deep chasm. That would be the end of it, severing all ties with her family and the past. And she did just that, but tragically, as Han strained to push the open car door forward, the car moved and sped up faster than she expected. At the same moment, Han's foot tripped on a rock, causing her to stumble forward, and her hand caught on the car door handle. The car dragged Van Han along with it. Thien Huong had just arrived, witnessing the entire horrifying scene with utmost panic. She opened her mouth wide and shrieked, "Han!" Then, as if by inertia or some invisible force, Huong was propelled towards the cliff. She managed to see Han flail before disappearing into the bottomless abyss. Losing all self-control, Thien Huong squeezed her eyes shut, falling unconsciously towards the deep chasm. Thu Ha, who was in the hermitage, suddenly heard strange sounds and quickly rushed down. She just managed to see Thien Huong fall from the edge of the cliff. Dangling by the precipice, Thu Ha only had time to let out a startled cry. Then, as if someone pushed her from behind, the poor girl's entire body plunged down after her two friends. At that moment, dusk was falling, thick mist descended on Bao Loc Peak, and darkness came very quickly. That very night, while deep in sleep, Mrs. Nguyen Din suddenly screamed and sat bolt upright. Her husband also woke up, surprised. "What's wrong, dear?" He felt her hands, feet, and forehead. His wife's face was drenched in sweat. Mr. Nguyen Din worried, "Did you have a nightmare?" The woman, usually sharp-tongued and fierce, now burst into pathetic sobs. Mr. Din had to snap, "What is it?" At this, she hugged him, her voice trembling. "I saw Han and her two friends, including Thu Ha, Tuan's girl. They were all covered in blood with disheveled hair. They were standing right here, looking at me and crying, but not saying anything." Mr. Nguyen Din breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was just a dream, but she kept crying. "I saw it so clearly. Van Han seemed to want to tell me something, but before she could, someone pulled her away and she vanished. I'm so worried, what do we do?" He turned on the lights. Mr. Nguyen Din called out loudly, "NHU Lan, wake up and come here." NHU Lan, still sleepy, was immediately barraged with questions by her mother as soon as she entered. "Where has Van Han been since this morning?" As if from another world, NHU Lan shook her head. "How would I know?" Both Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen Din ran to Han's private room, opened the door, and found no one. Suddenly, he walked directly to the vanity table, picked up a small piece of paper with Han's handwriting. "Dear mother and father, your unfilial daughter has long caused you unhappiness and much worry. Now I resolve not to trouble you any longer. I will choose a very distant place, a place free from the troubles of life, to entrust my body there. Please do not look for me, for that is what I wish. Please forgive me." He dropped the letter, saying flatly, "She's left home." She snatched the letter and after reading it was aghast. "This isn't good, my dream." That day, coincidentally, Thien Huong's and Thu Ha's parents also rushed over to recount dreams similar to Van Han's mother's. Thien Huong's mother recounted, "In the middle of the night, I heard Thien Huong call out, 'Mother, save me.' When I opened my eyes, I saw her standing next to Han and another girl. All three were covered in blood, as if they'd been in some kind of car accident." Mr. Nguyen Din panicked at this. The car, she drove the car. He called the household drivers and asked. Everyone replied, yes, Miss Tu did drive out early this morning, but we thought it was just like usual. The maid in the house recounted. When Miss Han left, she told me to get her some pots and pans, a few cooking utensils, and also some rice. When I asked where she was going, she said she was going out with some friends, which was strange. Miss Han never cooked before. Mrs. Din chimed in. She doesn't even know how to rinse rice when cooking, so what would she take pots and pans for? Is she going away for a long time? Mr. Din snapped. She wrote it in the letter. She's gone for good, but where did she go, and why is Thu Ha there too? That was Tuan speaking up. This was the first time he had returned home in a month. Seeing Tuan, his parents were overjoyed. Tuan, go find them, my son, Tuan recounted. Around midnight, I also saw Thu Ha appear. Her face was bruised and bloody. She didn't say anything, just stood there crying, and then she vanished. After much deliberation, Mr. Hong Fat finally decided to establish a farm in the valley at the foot of Bao Loc Pass. Many ironically asked him, is there nowhere else you could choose that you pick this hellish basin to build a settlement? Mr. Hong Fat spoke to each person privately, not letting his 3 sons hear. My goal is to isolate these 3 prodigal sons from everyone, which is why I chose this place, not because I don't know any better. Looking at his 3 sons, in the prime of their youth yet seemingly as delicate as refined ladies, his friends sighed in resignation. In 3 weeks, they'll all run away from here. Then you'll be alone. Mr. Hong Fat gave a forced smile. I have to try, don't I? Last year, I sent them to Ken Tho, deep in the boondocks, but they all ran back to Saigon after only 4 days. You know Thien, the eldest, ruined 2 of my cars and a townhouse. And Duong, his younger brother, sold 2 entire truckloads of live chickens. Ngok, the youngest, seemed better, but in less than a year, he stole the house keys and pawned them twice. I had to redeem them, almost going bankrupt because of them. He then sighed and continued. All their money went to dancers and the Dai the Joy and Kim Trung casinos. A friend shook his head. A leopard never changes its spots. Even if you bring them down here, they'll run away eventually. I know, he said, but I still have to do it. And you gentlemen should remember, the road from the main highway down here will need the indigenous people to guide us. Sometimes, we even have to be carried in hammocks to cross the streams, deep ravines, and chasms. I hope this rugged terrain will hold them longer, until their mother and I sell all our assets, gather our capital, and return to our hometown to start a business. By then, if they come back, it won't matter. Mr. Hong Fat organized things quite logically. He wanted people to clear 5 acres of forest land, then plant 3-leaf pine trees, a species on the verge of extinction in Dalat. According to him, while pine cultivation took a long time to yield profit, it was the best way to keep his 3 prodigal sons tied down. Than, the eldest, was in charge of supervising them. Duong, who had studied agriculture, managed the technical aspects. As for Ngok, the youngest, he was responsible for coordinating the laborers' hours, tasks, and wages. Mr. Fat paid the indigenous people in the mountains directly for their help with planting and caring for the forest, paying 6 months in advance. Thus, none of his 3 sons had access to money for spending. He built a large house in the middle of the farm for the 3 to live together, but all 3 objected and demanded separate quarters. Ngok said, I just want a small hut, that's fine, as long as it's my own world where I can write poetry and prose. Perhaps thinking his youngest son had a literary talent, Mr. Hong Fat agreed and built Ngok a charming stilt house in a corner of the garden. Seeing this, Than also made a demand. Duong and I will share, but the house should have 2 main doors facing different directions so each of us can come and go as we please, maintaining our privacy. I want time to reflect on the past to forget it. Duong also said, I'll create a separate nursery garden to research different plant species. So, Dad, please buy me all kinds of seeds. Seeing that his sons all intended to settle down like this, Mr. Hong Fat felt immense peace of mind. He left, secretly pleased, thinking that this time his plan would not fail. He returned to Saigon to sort out his affairs. His plans, such as gathering assets and selling the house, unexpectedly proceeded faster than anticipated. They were completed in just 2 months. He and his wife moved to Kai Rang, Ken Tho, to start a new life. 3 months later, he returned to Bao Loc. It took him half a day to reach the farm, and seeing all 3 of his sons made him indescribably happy. Especially since they were all healthy, cheerful, and more vibrant than he had imagined. Ngok, the most talkative of the three brothers, spoke up immediately. "Dad, you don't have to worry about us anymore. Brother Duong has successfully planted rice for us to eat. He's also grown many vegetables and fruits without waiting for the seeds you brought. All of them were given to us by someone. And Brother Thien goes into the mountains every day to find pine saplings and hunt for extra food that he can sell. As for me, I've written almost half a novel. When it's finished, I'll ask you to take it back to Saigon to print." Surprised by this, he tentatively asked, "Doesn't anyone want to go back to Saigon?" All three were resolute. "We'll stay here permanently, and who knows, we might even get married and have children." Hearing something like a fairy tale, Mr. Hung Fat burst out laughing, showing disbelief. Thien confirmed, "It's true, we'll get married here." Staying at the farm for 3 days, Mr. Hung Fat discreetly tried to find out if his 3 sons had met and become involved with any girls from this mountainous region, but he searched in vain. This remote, deep valley was inhabited only by indigenous people, and the young women there, all of them, had dark, marked skin and almost never approached kin people. Clearly, they were not the objects of his sons' affections. Finally, he came to his own conclusion. His sons had adapted to the work and had truly reformed, knowing how to think and cultivate themselves. He was very happy when he left. But there was one thing that the poor father would never know. All 3 had truly found lovers. Let's begin with Ngok's story, the youngest, a romantic soul deeply in love with literature. It was mid-month. The full moon shone brightly, illuminating the entire valley, beautiful as a watercolor painting. Sitting in his stilt house room, looking out, Ngok unconsciously recited a few lines of love poetry. Suddenly, someone interrupted his poetic inspiration. What a romantic poet. Startled, Ngok turned and was utterly astonished to see a girl standing in the middle of his private room, dressed in a beautiful pink silk outfit, like a celestial fairy. Who are you?" Seeing Ngok's confusion, the girl moved closer and smiled, a smile so captivating it seemed to make the very heavens swoon. A guest in the house and no invitation to sit. Only then did Ngok stammer, How did you get into my room? My door was bolted." Deed, the door was still bolted from the inside. The girl maintained her smile. "So just because of that, I'm not allowed to sit, am I?" Ngok had no choice but to stand up and offer his only chair to her, but the girl immediately sat on the bed, playfully pouting, "I'm so exhausted and cold too. If only I could lie down and rest for a bit, that would be lovely." As she spoke, she leaned back and lay down as casually as a close acquaintance. Ngok became even more awkward. You are." The girl's eyes were closed, her voice genuinely sleepy. "I've been cold all night, I might even have a cold." Then she drifted off to sleep. Ngok had no other choice but to sit there, watching his uninvited guest. At this moment, he became even more captivated, intensely stirred by the extraordinary beauty of the sleeping girl. It felt as if this wasn't reality but some dream. Until she spoke again, her eyes still closed. "I'm about to die. How can you be so heartless not to save me?" As if by some invisible urge, Ngok stepped forward, reached out to touch the girl's forehead, and was about to go look for cold medicine. Suddenly, the girl grabbed Ngok's hand tightly. She urged, "Quick, give me a cow geo, coin rubbing, hurry." Ngok obeyed like a machine. He felt a bit awkward pulling up the girl's shirt to apply oil, but the girl showed no shyness, even arching her back to make it easier for Ngok to lift her shirt. Her white skin was revealed before his eyes, making Ngok dizzy, his face flushed and his heart pounding. After finishing her back, the girl automatically turned to her chest. Seeing Ngok still hesitant, she urged in a weak voice, "Rub my chest too, it'll help." Ngok followed, and almost at that moment, his fingers were no longer under his own control. He stared at her chest, rising and falling, his eyes blurring and clearing, his breath also quickening. At one point, the girl suddenly cried out, "I'm so cold, I'm going to freeze to death." Ngok snapped awake, reached out to touch her skin, and involuntarily exclaimed, "Cold as ice, oh my God." The girl continued, "There's no other way, you have to lie on top of me to save me, I'm going to die, oh my God." Her cry pierced Ngok's heart like a needle. He lost all self-control, quickly climbed onto the girl, lying face down on her. And so, a moment later, Ngok felt that her whole body had warmed up, her breathing became more even, but Ngok himself slowly sank into a deep sleep. The oil lamp had burned out its wick and slowly flickered off. Thien's story began one afternoon. Thien was resting by the stream after a morning spent trekking almost the entire forest looking for saplings. Unable to find any, Thien turned to hunting, a task he performed almost daily. But unfortunately, That day Thien shot nearly 24 arrows without even wounding a rabbit. Frustrated, Thien sat down to rest, and the cool breeze made him doze off without realizing it. Suddenly, a faint groan nearby startled Thien awake. Before his eyes was a young kin girl, not yet 20, collapsed on the green grass, blood soaking one side of her shoulder and shirt. Unsure if he was awake or dreaming, Thien spoke up. "What happened to you?" The only reply to Thien's question was a weak moan. It seemed the girl was utterly exhausted, so Thien quickly stepped forward, intending to help her up. However, as soon as he touched her, Thien gasped, "You're so cold, you must be." Thien quickly scooped the girl into his arms, intending to carry her home. But at that very moment, a heavy rainstorm erupted, so Thien, though he didn't want to, had to carry her back upstream along the creek. There, he distinctly remembered an abandoned hut belonging to loggers. The hut, though old and long unoccupied, was still discreet enough to shelter them from the rain. Setting the girl down, Thien now looked at her closely. She was beautiful, like a city girl. Her attire certainly suggested someone from the city. It had been a long time since he had seen such beauty, so Thien sat there, mesmerized, forgetting even to treat her wound. It wasn't until the girl stirred and let out a few soft moans that Thien suddenly snapped out of it. He ran outside to find a handful of leaves that the local indigenous people used for treating wounds. Bringing them back in, he tried to pull her shirt shoulder back to apply the medicine. But he fumbled and couldn't pull the sleeve back, it was too tight. Suddenly, Thien saw the girl raise her hand to unbutton her shirt and quickly slipped off the top part, revealing her injured shoulder. It was a fairly deep wound. The crushed leaves were applied and they had an immediate effect. The blood stopped flowing. At this point, the girl was more awake. She held out an arrow, still stained with blood, for Thien to see. "Who could be so cruel? Shot me with this arrow. Luckily, I'm not dead." Thien was startled, recognizing it as his own arrow. He mumbled, I shot a rabbit earlier, that's what I shot." The girl heard him and stared at Thien. "You shot me?" Thien became even more flustered. I shot a rabbit, shot it clearly." Another pain moan. The girl seemed to be in so much pain that she grabbed Thien with both hands and squeezed tightly. Though it hurt, Thien endured, and he felt a little relieved because her hands were no longer icy cold like before. Almost killed someone, and a little medicine is all it takes. Thien gently removed her hands, but she clung on as if deliberately holding him back. At this, Thien managed to crack a joke. "I'm not leaving, don't worry." Her arms were no longer gripping painfully but were embracing him gently, very comfortably. Thien secretly wished she would stay like that. "Are you from De Lat here hunting?" "No, I live here, on the farm over there." How did you get lost in this remote deep valley?" "I'm from Saigon. I came up here hunting with my father this morning and got lost and injured. Now I don't know where my father is." At this point, they seemed to have become more intimate. Thien asked, "What's your name?" "Diane. I'm Thien, the eldest of the 3 single brothers on this farm." Now the girl smiled. She sprang up as if she had never been injured and even joked, "Just me and 3 bachelors. How will I choose who to leave out?" Thien broadened his shoulders, showing off his strong physique. "It shouldn't be too bad then." "That depends." The rain outside had stopped, and the girl seemed worried. "Now it's really tricky. I don't know how to get back to De Lat." Thien looked at the sun, seeing it was still early, and said, "I haven't been in this region for long either, so I don't know the forest paths around here well. So you should stay and wait a few days to see if your family comes looking for you. If not, I'll hire an indigenous person to take you." She stuck out her tongue, showing reluctance to stay in that hut. Thien laughed. "Who would do that? My farm has all the amenities. If Miss Diane doesn't mind 3 bachelors, then come back there for a few days to rest and further treat your wound." From that moment on, it was truly Thien's fateful moment. Duong woke up very early and told his 2 brothers who were still home, "I'm going into the forest, to the indigenous village, to find plant species and research the soil. I'll be back when I'm done." He called out to Thien and Ngok, though in reality, for a week now, they hadn't woken up early like before. They just kept their room doors closed and stayed inside. He even heard Ngok call out from the stilt house, "I already told you not to call." Duong didn't go deep into the forest, but instead went back towards the valley near Bao Loc Pass. There was a stream flowing through, with cool water year-round. Often, if he wasn't in a hurry, Duong would spend hours immersing himself in that cool water. That morning was quite beautiful. Sunlight filtered through the leaves onto the clear blue water, and the gurgling sound created an ambience that would stir anyone. Duong felt sluggish, so instead of looking for medicinal plants first, he decided to take a dip in the stream to relax. The cool water indeed had a very beneficial effect. After just a few minutes of soaking, Duong felt refreshed and wanted to close his eyes and drift off to sleep. Being quite familiar with this section of the stream, Duong embraced a floating tree trunk in the middle of the current and let himself drift downstream without observing either bank. Suddenly, in a shallow section, Duong felt he had collided with something unusual. He looked again and exclaimed, "A person!" Indeed, a person was lying sprawled across the stream, half on the bank, half in the water, and it was a woman. Duong saw blood flowing from the girl's temple and frantically called out, "Miss, are you all right?" The girl was silent, but seeing the faint rise and fall of her chest, Duong knew she was still alive. Without a second's delay, Duong scooped her up and carried her to the bank, finding a flat spot to lay her down. The first thing he did was tear a piece of his shirt to wipe the wound on her temple dry and bandage it to stop the bleeding. About 5 minutes later, the girl regained consciousness. Seeing Duong, she was startled and immediately sat up. "You are?" Duong tried to appear friendly. "I live on a nearby farm. I just happened to be bathing in the stream when I found you injured." The girl still looked terrified, her hands clutching her chest, her eyes darting around as if fearing pursuit. Duong had to reassure her, "Aside from you and me, there's no one else here. People call this another world." The girl was still not at ease. "They were chasing me, they'll catch me again." "Who are they?" The girl was silent for a long time before recounting her story. "My family forced me to marry a rich man, older than my father. He took me up to Dalat, and as we passed the pass, I used the excuse of needing to pee and jumped into the ravine." Duong exclaimed, "How foolish of you. Do you know that even if one were made of bronze and iron, falling from here would shatter them, let alone a human?" Looking her over, Duong asked, "Do you feel injured anywhere else?" The girl tried moving her arms and legs, then shook her head. "No, I'm fine. Perhaps this morning I fell onto a tree branch and then into the deep stream." Duong clicked his tongue. "How lucky for you." "That's right, a few hundred meters upstream from this stream, it's very deep, and the water flows from there to here. Perhaps you fell and drifted down from there, getting caught in this spot." Seeing that her injuries weren't too severe, Duong suggested, "I don't know the extent of your injuries. How about I take you back to the farm to rest temporarily until your family comes looking for you?" The girl cut him off. "Never. If they come looking, I'd rather go deep into the forest for leopards and tigers to eat me. That would be more comfortable." Duong offered his hand for her to take, and she stood up. "Can you walk?" She tried to take a step, then suddenly winced in pain. Duong had to bend down and say, "You can't walk. Get on my back and I'll carry you. Don't be shy." The girl showed no shyness at all, clinging naturally to Duong's back. The stream path back home was almost a kilometer and difficult to traverse, yet with a girl on his back, Duong didn't feel tired at all. He thought to himself and smiled. Not wanting Thien and embarked to see, Duong immediately took her to his private room, and to put the girl at ease, Duong said, "This is the private residence of us 3 brothers. Each has his own world, no one intrudes on another. They won't question having a stranger here. You can rest on that bed and I'll sleep out on this porch. I often read and fall asleep out here at night. But don't worry, I've never done anything improper with anyone, especially since I'm trying to cultivate my mind now." If observant, Duong would have seen the girl turn away and smile. Duong, usually the most reserved and least talkative of the 3 brothers, was remarkably lively today. He busied himself tidying the room, preparing to screen off the sleeping area, and explaining, "Although this is a private room, since I'm here too, you'll need even more privacy. This room has all the amenities, a bathroom, a toilet, and even a private kitchen. My other 2 brothers also have their own worlds like this, so everyone takes care of their own. They never come over here. If you happen to meet them in the yard, just say you're a friend visiting from Saigon." "And what is your esteemed name, if I may ask?" I am Duong." That night, for the first time, a girl was present in Duong's bedroom. Early in the evening, Duong slept on the porch, but from midnight until dawn, his silhouette was no longer seen outside. A month later, Mr. Hong Fat returned to the farm. But instead of being guided by the indigenous people through the forest and across waterfalls, this time Mr. Hong Fat had to painstakingly grope his way alone for nearly half the journey. This was because he couldn't find anyone to ask for help. When he reached their homes, they were deserted, even their cultivated fields were empty. Old people and children alike had vanished. It wasn't until noon, when Mr. Hong Fat's legs were aching and covered in scratches, that he finally encountered an old village elder. This man was quite familiar. He had guided Mr. Hong Fat and his sons to the farm on previous occasions. When asked about the inexplicable absence of everyone outside, Old Man Jiup spoke with worry in his voice. They abandoned the village simply out of fear of ghosts. Finding this strange, Mr. Hong Fat pressed, "Such a thing happened." Old Man Jiup recounted, nearly half a moon cycle ago, 2 young men who went hunting were found dead in the forest, and both had their internal organs gouged out. "Who did that?" Jiup raised his hands to the sky. "Only the spirits know where those ghosts came from. Why didn't I hear about this when I came up here before?" Looking at Mr. Hong Fat with a slightly odd expression, Old Man Jiup finally continued, "It's because of your sons." "What? Why my sons?" Jiup pulled a silver bracelet engraved with the names Thien, Huong, and Gok from his waistband and said, "Is this your sons?" Holding the object, Mr. Hong Fat nodded, confirming, "Yes, it's my sons. All 3 of them have worn bracelets like this since they were little. But where did you get it?" Pulling Mr. Fat to a large tree, Old Man Jiup pointed forward and said, "Every night, my villagers see 3 long-haired white figures gliding over the grass from your farm. They go into our villages and cause mischief. Any unfortunate man who goes out encounters danger. I personally risked following them for several nights. Until the night Mrs. Ho's 2 sons were harmed, I found this bracelet left at that spot." Unable to believe what he had just heard, Mr. Fat waved his hand. "That can't be. My sons live together. There are no girls there. Or perhaps it's forest spirits or local spirits from your villages." Old Man Jiup angrily retorted, "Our spirits are not so cruel, and our spirits don't wear white clothes and have long hair like kin ghosts." Thinking further questions would be pointless, Mr. Hong Fat asked Old Man Jiup to take him to the farm, but Old Man Jiup only promised, "I'll only take you to the head of the valley. I won't go into your farm anymore." The sun was setting as they arrived. Mr. Fat entered the farm alone and was slightly surprised by the unusual silence. Seeing that the doors of Than's and Duong's houses were tightly locked, he went to Ngok's stilt house and also found the door closed. Although not locked from the outside, it seemed Ngok wasn't home. He called out 3 times but received no answer, thinking his sons might have gone into the forest, so Mr. Fat turned to leave. Suddenly, a strange sound emanated from inside the house, like Ngok's voice. Startled, Mr. Fat rushed up the stairs and pushed the door open. Before his eyes was a horrifying scene. Ngok lay on the floor, his body limp with 2 streams of congealed blood flowing from his neck. Reaching out to touch his nose, he felt Ngok was still breathing. Mr. Fat screamed, "Than, Duong, come here!" Despite his cries, there was no sign of Than or Duong. A bad premonition. Mr. Fat ran to their doors, kicking them open, and once again he was horrified to find both of them lying unconscious on their beds. They were emaciated. It took an hour of shouting until his throat was hoarse. Finally, Mr. Fat saw Old Man Jiup appear with some villagers. Old Man Jiup looked at the 3 young men in that state and remarked, "They've been harmed by evil spirits. Those 3 white-robed ghosts, no one else would come here." Looking closely at the pillows in all 3 bedrooms, many long, black strands of women's hair remained. But when he held them up to his nose, Old Man Jiup felt a very unpleasant, fishy smell. The old man exclaimed, "This smell is like that of a corpse." Mr. Hong Fat had the same sensation, but out of extreme worry for his son's safety, he urged everyone, "Forget the hair, please help me take my sons for treatment, I beg you." Old Man Jiup seemed quite knowledgeable about evil spirits. He said, "If they've been afflicted by this, going to the hospital will be useless. Let me treat them." He personally went into the forest and returned over half an hour later with a handful of grass and leaves. He told everyone, "While I'm giving them medicine, someone please help me cook 3 chickens and extract the broth for them to drink when they wake up." That treatment method proved effective. After a few hours, all 3 regained consciousness. Ngok was the weakest and still appeared terrified when he saw people. He screamed intermittently, "No, don't suck my blood." Than and Duong, on the other hand, just opened their eyes and then closed them again. Only those with very keen hearing could hear them faintly murmur, "Don't go, Thuranga, don't go, Dian, I want to die with you, wait for me." Mr. Hong Fat wanted to go mad with his 3 sons. He helplessly watched them, half dead, as if insane, and sighed. Old Man Jiup and the villagers left one by one. Before leaving, Old Man Jiup told him, "This place is not fit to live in. Burn the farm and leave." He didn't reply, but in Mr. Hong Fat's mind, he had already considered something similar. On the way up to Dilat, Tai had never encountered trouble like this time. The red bus he was on was smoothly cruising from Saigon, when suddenly it sputtered to a halt halfway up Bao Loc Pass. Even the driver was surprised and grumbled. The engine was just overhauled, it's run 2 trips already, there were no signs of trouble. The driver got out, checked the engine under the hood, found nothing unusual, then got back in and tried starting it. The engine started perfectly. At that point, Ty and the passengers, who had gotten off to stretch their legs, were called back onto the bus to continue the journey. Ty was the last to board. However, something strange happened. As soon as Ty got on, the engine, which was running, suddenly died. The driver tried to restart it, but it wouldn't go. He asked everyone to get off to prevent the bus from rolling down the slope, and Ty was the first passenger to step off. Strangely, as soon as Ty's feet touched the ground, the engine spontaneously roared to life. Ty, annoyed, got back on, and the engine sputtered again. This repeated 4 times. Even Ty was surprised. He tried not getting on the bus the very last time and told the driver, "Try turning off the engine and restarting it." It turned on and off easily as if nothing was wrong. But as soon as Ty stepped on, the engine would just sit there, stubborn. Nothing would make it work. Finally, an elderly passenger offered an opinion. "It seems this young man has a very heavy spirit." Another person added, "People with heavy spirits often have trouble with vehicles." Ty became irritated. "How can one tell if a spirit is heavy or light? I paid for my ticket like everyone else, and I've traveled this road for over 10 years without any problems." The problem persisted for the 6th time. When Ty stepped off the bus, the driver had to plead with him. "Please, young man, help everyone get home early. I'll refund your fare. There are a few more buses coming up later. Please take one of those." A passenger sitting near Ty proactively moved his bag off the bus, a decisive gesture to just get rid of the unlucky passenger. Though he wanted to object, given the situation, Ty had no choice but to accept. He stood there glumly for a moment, then slowly walked towards the pass, hoping to catch another bus to go home and rest. He hadn't gone 100 meters when a sudden downpour erupted. Rain in the highlands is like that, sudden and unpredictable. Looking around for a place to shelter from the rain, Ty suddenly looked up at the mountain and saw a small shrine. Without hesitation, Ty quickly climbed the stone steps to get there. He thought it was better than enduring the rain out in the open on the pass. By the time he reached it, Ty's legs were aching. He saw the shrine door wasn't closed, so he walked right in. Inside, it was pitch black. At first glance, he couldn't see anything. The musty smell was unbearable, but Ty endured because at this moment, there was no other place to shelter from the rain. After about 15 minutes, his eyes adjusted to the darkness. Ty scanned the interior. There was no altar, no statues, or anything typically found in a shrine, except for what looked like several bags placed on the floor. So, someone is already here. Finding a matchbox in his pocket, Ty lit a match and spoke up. "Is anyone in the shrine? I seek shelter." No one replied. By then, Ty could clearly see 3 handbags and a full bag of something inside. Reaching out to touch them, he felt dust, indicating they had been there for quite some time. Suddenly, he exclaimed, "This!" One of the 3 handbags caught Ty's attention. He walked over, picked it up, and clearly saw a small tag with the words Thien Huong on it. It's Thien Huong's. Ty couldn't be mistaken. He and Huong had bought this bag together at De Lat Market when Thien Huong was still in boarding school there. Daring to open the bag, he saw it was clearly Huong's clothes. Ty cried out in alarm, "Thien Huong, you're here? Huong, it's raining, thunder is rumbling," yet Ty's loud calls still echoed outside. He called over 10 times until his throat was hoarse, but no one replied. Ty frantically ran out, regardless of the wind and rain, running and shouting Thien Huong's name, just as he had called out in despair 6 months ago when he heard of Huong's disappearance. By the time the rain gradually stopped, Ty was also gone. He collapsed right in front of the shrine door. The last bus to De Lat whizzed by, leaving behind 2 passengers who had gotten off just 15 minutes earlier when the bus broke down. Thuyen said angrily, "They blamed us for the engine dying on the pass and took advantage of us going to the bathroom to abandon us. Those scoundrels." Phu was calmer, only sighing, "From here to Bao Loc town is still 5 to 7 kilometers. How are we going to get there?" Thuyen was still indignant at being accused of having a heavy spirit. "Punch the air. Their car broke down because it's old, why blame us?" Phu remembered and spontaneously said, "It is strange, though. Why is it that every time we 2 get on the bus, the engine stops running, and when we get off, it starts again? They tried it over a dozen times, didn't they? Don't you think it's weird, Thuyen?" "Well, it is weird, but I don't believe in such superstitious nonsense." Phu smiled wryly. "But the drivers believe it, and the passengers too, that's the terrible part." Tuan looked at his watch and grew even more worried. It's already past 5 p.m. How are we going to get to Dalat? Tai must be very worried up there. I promised Tai we'd definitely meet at Thai Ta House. Hearing Tai mentioned, Fu asked, I haven't met Tai yet, but from what you say, Tuan, he's very heartbroken, isn't he? Tuan sighed. Ever since Thien Huong, Van Han, and Thu Ha went missing, Tai has been almost out of his mind, abandoning his studies and wandering everywhere to search for them. You and I are also heartbroken, but we're calmer than he is. Fu felt a pang in his heart when Tuan brought up the painful story. He looked down, saying nothing. After a long while, he finally said to Tuan, Thank you, Tuan, for coming all the way to the tea plantation to tell me about Van Han. Otherwise, I would have still believed Han was at home for a long time. Although the rain had just stopped, the wind was still blowing strongly and colder. Fu, having more experience living in this region, said, It's going to rain again today and heavily. We should find shelter soon. Suddenly, Fu exclaimed, What's that up there? Looks like a house. Tuan looked and vaguely recognized a small shrine. He said dejectedly, It's just an abandoned shrine I've seen every time I pass by here. But Fu remained interested. An abandoned shrine is better than nothing right now, isn't it? Let's go up there to shelter from the rain. Tuan didn't want to, but at this point, there was no other choice, so after a few seconds of hesitation, he nodded. All right, let's go up there. When we see car headlights coming up, we'll run down and flag them down. It wasn't bright anymore, so climbing the slope was a bit arduous. It took them over 5 minutes to get close to the shrine. Tuan went first. Suddenly, he stopped, seeing something in front of the shrine door. He cried out, Someone's there. Clearly, someone was lying sprawled in front of the shrine door. Fu was quicker. He stepped forward, bent down, and exclaimed, He's still breathing, Tuan. Tuan stepped closer, and this time it was his turn to cry out, It's Tai. They helped Tai into the shrine, lit a match to illuminate everything. Tuan couldn't control his emotions when he saw a red handbag. He rushed over, quickly opened the bag, and recognized each item inside. It's all Thu Ha's, it really is Thu Ha's. Fu also took the remaining black handbag, and just as he opened it, Tuan shouted, That's Van Han's. Just then, Tai also regained consciousness. He was extremely surprised to see the two of them. Why? Tuan was overjoyed. Did you find them already? Tai looked bewildered. Find who? Thien Huong, Van Han, Thu Ha. Tai looked at the handbags and instinctively cried out, Thien Huong? The hope that had just flickered in Tuan and Fu died out after Tai recounted how he had searched everywhere without any trace. Tuan looked at the dust clinging to the outside of the handbags. He was even more disappointed. They've been here for quite some time, you can tell by the dust. Fu rummaged through a food bag and confirmed it. The food has spoiled long ago, proving they haven't eaten it. Tai couldn't believe the truth, but they left their belongings here. Where did they go? They're girls, how far could they go? Tuan also said, Van Han was driving when they left, so where did they leave the car and come up here? Tuan's words seemed to stun Tai and Fu. They looked at each other without speaking, but they seemed to share the same thought. Tuan pulled his two friends' hands. Let's go down there. They rushed down the road very quickly. Tuan was still leading the way. He urged, Earlier before coming up here, I enhin thay mo chaik zibo nam ben vachnui, ta toi du zem. Earlier before coming up here, I saw an abandoned car by the mountainside. Let's go check it out. The pass road was winding and steeply dark, yet the three young men dashed forward relentlessly. About 20 minutes later, they reached the car. They were immediately disappointed because it was an old light truck. Utterly disheartened, they all sat down beside the car. A moment later, headlights swept up from below the slope. Then a heavy truck slowly drove up. Recognizing that there were people next to the broken-down car, the driver asked, Broken down? Do you need any help? Tuan quickly said, It's not our car. I wanted to ask if you've seen any abandoned tourist cars around here. A woman vendor sitting next to the driver blurted out, No cars left abandoned, only one fell into this ravine. But that was a long, long time ago. All three rushed out, clinging to the car door, asking urgently, Can you explain more clearly? What kind of accident was it? The woman urged the driver to stop a little further ahead at a flat spot. She was the kind of talkative person who loved gossiping about others, so this was her chance to shine. I travel this road daily for my business, so I know everything that happens. Few people know about that car plunging into the ravine. Only I happened to overhear an indigenous person from the valley below the pass tell the story. They saw the car plunge down, and many people fell out. Seeing the three young men's distressed looks, the driver offered, You boys, get in the truck. I'll take you to Dalat and we'll figure things out later. What this woman is saying isn't confirmed yet anyway. All three simultaneously let go of the car door. Fu waved his hand. "Thank you, but please go ahead. We have something to do here." The driver warned, "Staying on the pass in this weather is very dangerous." Despite the warning, the three remained forlorn, standing alone in the dark night with heavy hearts. They tried to find a way down to the valley. Fu led the way because he had lived in the mountainous forest region for many years. First, they followed the direction near the foot of the pass, going upstream. This was a long and dangerous path, but there was no other choice because it was the rainy season. The water in the streams was high and constantly posed a danger to those crossing them. Fortunately for them, just over a kilometer from the foot of the pass, they encountered a local resident. He was an indigenous person who spoke Kin, so after Fu asked about the whereabouts of the crashed cars, he pointed ahead. About 5 kilometers from here, car accidents often happen there. The people in the valley all avoid that place and don't dare to build houses there. With a guide, their journey became less dangerous. Among them, Tai seemed the most devastated. Since waking up, Tai had constantly murmured Thien Huong's name and walked as if sleepwalking. Tuan had to remind him, "If you're like this, how will you be able to search? Anyway, it's come to this point, we have to bravely face reality." Though he spoke strongly to Tai, Tuan's heart was just as shattered and distraught as his friends. His love for Thu Ha had made Tuan live as if dead since early morning. He had abandoned his chance to study abroad in France at his parents' command and left home to search for Van Han and Thu Ha everywhere. He had been to De Lat several times, which is how he met Tai, and conceived the idea of finding Fu to go together and search for the people they loved. Only Fu was always silent, always hiding his emotions, though his heart was no different from his two friends in the same plight. Especially when Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen Din pressured him to accept exile to the tea plantation, a place whose harshness was no less severe than this deep valley below. He had endured separation from Van Han for over 6 months, but always believed that his beloved would wait and that they would eventually be reunited. The guide led them past a small waterfall, along the rushing stream towards the foot of the pass. He said, "Cars frequently fall down at that section. Sometimes bodies drift down this way and the villagers retrieve them and bury them over there." He pointed to a low hill where over a dozen grassy graves had sprouted green. Fu anxiously asked, "How can we get there faster?" The guide waved his hand. "You can't go there. Cars from the pass can fall on your heads at any moment." Tuan was resolute. "Just take us close to that place and we'll go on our own." About an hour later, they reached the middle of the stream. Looking up into the abyss, Tuan involuntarily sighed. If a car falls down like this, how could anyone survive? All three were silent for several tens of seconds, none needing to tell the others. Tai, the weakest of all, grabbed Tuan's hand, asking with a trembling voice, "What do we do now, Tuan?" Tuan didn't know what words to find to comfort him, only to hear Fu exclaim, "There's a car in that rock crevice." Following Fu's pointing hand, Tuan looked and was startled. "That car is Van Han's." The SIMK-9, painted in 2 striking colors of blue and black, stood out in the rock crevice. Even the license plate was clearly visible from over 50 meters away. Tuan disregarded any obstacles ahead, pushed through thorny grass, and quickly moved towards the car. Getting closer, he realized the front of the car was crushed. The doors were sprung open, but the rear remained intact. All three, filled with fear, took hesitant steps towards the car, peering inside. There was no one in the car, not even a human skeleton. Tai had been weeping uncontrollably. He leaned on Tuan's shoulder as if seeking support, mumbling, "Could Thien Huong still be alive, Tuan?" Fu seemed more knowledgeable. "Usually, people inside cars that fall into a ravine are thrown out. Let's search around here." A strenuous search continued until late morning, but nothing was found. Feeling somewhat disheartened, Tuan suggested, "Let's go to that village for lunch and continue searching in the afternoon." Tai didn't want to go, prompting Tuan to remind him again, "They fell here 6 months ago. Even if we find them, it would only be..." Tuan left the sentence unfinished. All three walked towards the village. The guide was still waiting for them on the hill. He pointed towards a large farm. "If you want to rest, go to that abandoned farm over there." Abandoned farm. "Why abandoned?" Fu asked. The guide explained, "This was a farm established by a man from Saigon for his 3 sons, but they only lived there for 3 or 4 months before nearly losing their lives." Tuan was surprised. Why? They were possessed by ghosts. All three were captivated by the ghost story. When the guide recounted the presence of 3 female ghosts, Tai, being the most sensitive, cried out, "Thien Huong can't be a ghost." "But whoever said Thien Huong was a ghost?" Tuan said. However, the more the guide narrated, Thien himself felt that the descriptions resembled their loved ones. It wasn't until they were taken to the stilt house that Tai exclaimed upon seeing a hairpin on the bed. "This is Thien Huong's." Tai himself had bought Huong this purple hairpin with a golden butterfly design and 2 interwoven TH initials. "It's true, Thien Huong once lived here. She's still here." Tai frantically searched inside and outside the house, shouting, "Thien Huong, Huong." The guide shook his head. "He's gone mad. That ghost girl herself entered this stilt house and nearly killed the farm owner's youngest son. How could she be this young man's beloved?" In other rooms, Thien and Tai found belongings of Thu Ha and Van Han. Thien held a light pink scarf that Han had worn to the plantation and had also wrapped around Phu when he was sick. In a corner of the scarf, the initials VH were clearly embroidered by Phu himself. Thien picked up a wristwatch from a desk in another room. That watch was a gift he gave Thu Ha a month after they started dating, during a time Thien took his beloved boating in Phu Dinh. The guide fully recounted the story of the 3 female ghosts harming the 3 sons of the Hong Fat farm owner. The story he told made Thien, Phu, and Tai shiver with cold. Finally, Phu himself found 3 human skeletons lying in a rocky area downstream from the creek. He recognized a golden locket necklace, with the initials VH still on it, worn around a neck bone. They carried all 3 skeletons up, and that very day, they set up a solemn offering of incense and candles in the middle of the abandoned shrine. The ritual consisted only of wild bananas, and all 3 young men sat in the corners of the room, holding the 3 human skeletons, staring blankly into the distance. The next day, and for the entire week that followed, they remained like statues, sitting silently in the shrine. Then, one day, they suddenly disappeared without a trace. There were rumors that the 3, in their immense sorrow and despair, had taken their lovers' remains deep into the mountains to bury the rest of their lives. There were also rumors that on a dark night, amidst heavy rain and storms, in utter despair, all 3 had thrown themselves into the ravine. No one knows which story is true. The only thing is that ever since then, people driving over Bao Loc Pass have whispered among themselves that night after night, they see lights in the abandoned shrine, and occasionally, crying sounds echo down from there. Some even claim to have seen 3 female figures dressed entirely in white appearing intermittently on the pass section near the shrine. They stand dejectedly by the road near the precipice, sometimes seen standing at crossroads, as if waiting for vehicles going up and down. Many drivers say that if one drives past there without sincerely praying, it's very easy to become disoriented, and the car could easily fall into the ravine. Some even assert that although Mr. Nguyen Dinh's and Phat Dat's families don't know the specifics of their children's deaths, they suddenly become very afraid to drive over Bao Loc Pass. Then, for reasons unknown, the abandoned shrine on the mountain was renovated, now having an altar, an incense table, and people regularly coming to offer prayers. And right next to the shrine, a tombstone was erected which everyone knows is symbolic to bury the 3 unjustly killed girls. Since then, people have called that shrine the Shrine of the 3 Girls and the Tomb of the 3 Unjust Spirits. The name stuck, and its spiritual efficacy grew. Traders highly trust it and often stop their vehicles to make offerings. No mischief from the wronged spirits in the shrine has been reported.